I once took a solo trek along the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania, an unforgettable stretch of the longest hiking-only footpath in the world. It was just something I did for fun, a personal challenge. I chose to go late in the fall when the air was crisp and the crowds had all but vanished. The cold had settled in and the woods were almost eerily quiet. I think I only passed 2 other hikers the entire time, both heading in the opposite direction, bundled tight in layers, offering brief nods as they vanished down the path behind me. The section of trail I was on carved its way through thick forest, a dense canopy of skeletal trees arching overhead. Fallen leaves blanketed the ground in muted reds and browns, crunching under every step like whispers in the silence. The trail snaked beside a narrow, winding river, its water rushing softly over stones. It was the only sound besides the occasional birdsong breaking through the morning chill, isolated and fragile, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. After a while, my legs began to ache and I decided it was time for a break. I spotted a large, flat rock resting near the riverbank, half covered in moss and bathed in soft patches of sunlight that filtered through the thinning treetops. I climbed onto it, sat down, and took a long sip from my bottle of Gatorade. The cold air bit at my skin, but the stillness had a calming effect. That calm didn't last. Just as I set the bottle down beside me, I froze. From somewhere ahead, faint, distant, but unmistakable, I heard what sounded like a baby crying. The sound rose and fell in irregular bursts, piercing through the quiet like a blade. I sat motionless for a few seconds, unsure if my ears were playing tricks on me. But no, it was definitely there. A baby, crying, and it was coming from further down the trail, in the direction I was heading.
My heart rate ticked up. There was no logical reason for a baby to be out here, alone in the woods. The thought gnawed at me. What if someone had gotten lost? What if they needed help? I stood up, slung my pack back over my shoulder, and started walking again, quicker this time, following the sound. My boots thudded against the damp trail, but no matter how fast I moved, the crying stayed the same distance away, just barely out of reach, like it was drifting, leading me on. For at least 30 seconds, I hurried after it, heart thudding now for a very different reason. But the sound never got closer. It didn't fade either. It just remained constant, always just ahead, as though it were waiting. Eventually, I stopped in my tracks. My rational brain took the wheel and I let out a long breath. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe it was just someone else walking the trail ahead of me, a parent with a baby, out for a hike like I was. That explanation made sense, sort of. I told myself that anyway. And then, I kept walking. I eventually came to another large rock on the side of the trail, nestled just a few feet from the river's edge. The moss on it was still damp with dew, but I didn't care. I sat down, letting the weight of my pack pull against my shoulders. For a while, I just sat there in silence, trying to settle the strange unease that had crept into my chest. And then, the crying stopped. Not gradually, not fading into the distance like someone walking away. It just stopped, like a switch had been flipped. 1 second it was there, echoing faintly through the trees, and the next, absolute silence. I stayed seated on that rock for maybe 5 minutes, soaking in the natural stillness around me. The cold breeze rustled the leaves, and the river continued murmuring beside me. I pulled out my phone and lazily started recording a few short videos, shots of the trail, the canopy overhead, the sunlight flickering through bare branches. It felt good to be still again. But then, I heard footsteps. They were quick, crunching steadily through the fallen leaves, approaching from around a bend in the trail behind me. I figured it was just another hiker, finally catching up, so I looked up casually, expecting to see someone with a pack like mine. Instead, a woman came rushing toward me, fast, frantic, almost stumbling over her own feet. She wasn't just hurrying, she was charging, and before I had a chance to stand or say a word, she was right in front of me. She stopped inches from my face, so close I instinctively flinched back, and without warning, started screaming at me. "Have you seen my baby?" she shrieked, her voice panicked, cracked at the edges like it had been worn raw. Startled, I scrambled to my feet, my heart now thumping for an entirely different reason. I tried to stay calm and answered her as evenly as I could. I heard a baby crying not long ago," I told her. "It was coming from further up the trail. I was actually heading that way. Come on, I'll show you."
She didn't respond, just nodded stiffly and started walking behind me as I turned and picked up the pace. We moved quickly, heading in the direction I chased the cries earlier. I could hear her boots behind me, heavy and uneven, almost dragging. Every few seconds I glanced back, making sure she was still close, still following. She was. But something about her, I don't know. It wasn't just her desperation. It was how silent she'd gone. No follow-up questions, no thank you, no sobbing, nothing. Just blank focus and an awkward, clumsy gait that made my skin crawl a little more with each step. After a while, the silence between us became unbearable. I turned my head just slightly and tried to break it. "How did you lose your baby?" I asked gently, hoping not to trigger more panic. No response. I slowed down a little and glanced back again. She wasn't there. I stopped in my tracks. She had been right behind me. Just 10 seconds ago, I was sure of it, practically at my heels. But now, the trail was empty. Nothing but the trees swaying gently in the breeze. No footsteps, no crying, no rustle of movement behind me. Just gone. I spun around and shouted her name, though I'd never learned it. "Hello? Hey, ma'am?" My voice echoed slightly, swallowed quickly by the forest. Only the sound of the river nearby and birds chirping faintly in the distance answered me. I scanned the trail behind me, wide open, straight for at least 30 yards. If she'd walked off in any direction, I should have seen her. If she'd wandered into the woods, there would have been movement. But there was nothing. No sign of her at all. Not even the sound of her footsteps fading into the woods. Just gone. I stood there on the trail for what felt like forever, frozen, trying to decide what to do next. Do I keep moving forward, just carry on like nothing happened, try to finish the hike, enjoy what was left of the day, and forget about the woman who had vanished without a sound? Or do I turn around, retrace my steps, and try to find her? My gut twisted at the thought of both. Neither option felt right. Eventually, I took a deep breath and did one more full scan of the area we had just come from. A slow, deliberate turn, eyes combing the woods and riverbank in a wide 180-degree arc, just in case. That's when I saw her. Across the river, maybe 30 feet away, in the exact direction we had walked from, there she was. She stood on the opposite bank, completely still. Her arms hung loosely at her sides, limp like they no longer had weight. Her clothes clung to her body in the breeze, but she didn't react. No shivering, no blinking. And her face? She was staring straight at me. No staring, no movement, just watching, like a statue. A cold, numb pressure tightened in my chest, and for a few seconds, I honestly forgot how to breathe. My instincts screamed louder than logic ever could. That was it. That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to yell out to her again. I wasn't going to cross that river. I wasn't going to ask any more questions. I was getting the hell out of there. I spun around and started walking, fast. My boots hit the trail hard and steady, every stride longer than the last. I didn't care how far I had left to go or how tired I was. I just kept moving, letting adrenaline carry me until my calves were burning, my breathing turned shallow, and my throat felt dry and raw from the cold air. Eventually, I looped back to a connecting trail that led me toward the parking lot. I had originally planned to hike much farther, maybe even stay overnight, but after what happened, I couldn't do it. I cut the trip short, barely glancing back at the woods as they thinned out behind me. When I finally reached my car, hands trembling as I unlocked the door, a strange numbness settled over me. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to process everything. And that's when the question started. Did it actually happen? Was any of it real? The woman's sudden appearance, her screams, her silence, and then the way she just vanished, only to reappear across the river like some thing? It felt impossible, but at the same time, it wasn't, because I lived it. I felt the panic in my chest. I heard her voice. I saw her face. I've questioned my sanity more times than I can count since that day, and I still don't have answers. But sometimes I wonder if anyone else out there, anyone who's hiked the Appalachian Trail, has experienced something like that, something unexplainable, something that doesn't make sense. Because I know what I saw, and I know how it felt, and it's haunted me ever since. There's a nature preserve near my house, huge, sprawling, and completely out of place in a suburban area as crowded as ours. It stretches for miles, with dirt trails winding through thick patches of brush and tall trees, all crisscrossed with paths meant for hikers and cyclists. It's the kind of place you'd expect to find way out in the countryside, not nestled between schools, shopping plazas, and neatly trimmed cul-de-sacs. But there it is. And in the fall of 2016, one night around 11 p.m., I decided to go for a run. Yeah, I know, weird time, but that's just how I am. I've always preferred running when the world is quiet, when the sidewalks are empty and there's no one around to glance at you or make awkward eye contact as they pass. I don't like feeling watched when I run, so I avoid people. Simple as that. That night, I gripped my phone tightly in one hand, flashlight turned on, and started jogging from the edge of the preserve. The light from the screen bounced slightly with each stride, cutting through the darkness in a narrow, jittery beam. I hit the dirt trail a few paces in. No street lamps, no ambient light, just the rustle of leaves in the wind, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, and the soft hum of crickets all around me. Oddly enough, I felt energized, more than usual. There's no other way to describe it. It was like something about the night air, the silence, the isolation. It fed into my rhythm. My strides felt smoother, my breathing lighter. The usual fatigue just wasn't there. It was strange, but I didn't question it. I just kept going. The deeper I ran into the preserve, the more it felt like I was moving through another world, one where time didn't matter and the noise of the suburbs had been replaced by the quiet pulse of nature. My flashlight barely lit more than a few feet ahead, but I felt confident, comfortable. That is, until a thought surfaced. A dead body had been found in this preserve just a week before. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I mean, it was creepy, sure, but this was one of the safest neighborhoods in the state. A murder here? Practically unheard of. People whispered about it, traded theories, but there wasn't much to go on. It felt like one of those things you hear about on the news once and forget a few days later. At least, that's what I told myself. So no, I didn't let it stop me from going out that night. Didn't let it get under my skin. At least, not at first. Because out there, surrounded by trees and shadows and the rhythmic pounding of my own footsteps, a new realization began to settle in. This preserve, this massive, wild patch of earth carved into the middle of suburbia, was completely, utterly empty. No cyclists, no walkers, no voices, no distant sounds of cars or street noise, just me. Or at least, that's what I thought. After about 10 minutes of steady running, the adrenaline started to wear off, and reality, along with the burning in my legs and lungs, came rushing in. I'll admit it, I was out of shape back then, so when I spotted a bench just off the trail, I gratefully slowed down and made my way over to it. I sat down, catching my breath in short, shallow gulps, the cool air scraping down my throat. My phone light bobbed slightly as I rested it in my lap, and that's when the silence really hit me. It was pitch black out there, and I don't mean dim or shadowy, I mean total, suffocating blackness, broken only by the narrow cone of white light from my flashlight. I'd been so focused on the run that I hadn't noticed how deep the darkness had settled in around me. Sitting there alone, in the middle of a massive preserve that felt more like untouched wilderness than a suburban park, I felt something shift. It was the same feeling you'd get if you were stranded in the center of a dense forest, disconnected, vulnerable, alone. That's when I started to notice the sounds. Faint rustles, snaps, the kind of noises that might be nothing during the day, but take on a whole new meaning when you're alone in the dark. I tried to keep my head on straight, figured it was just animals, a raccoon maybe, or a fox nosing around in the leaves. That's what I told myself. But then I heard something more distinct, the crunch of leaves and twigs, closer, heavier, deliberate. My whole body went stiff. I held my breath and scanned the trees around me, squinting into the shifting shadows just beyond my flashlight's reach. My heart picked up its pace again, but this time it wasn't from running. And then I saw it. Something tall. It was partially hidden, standing behind one of the trees just off the path. I couldn't make out much. My phone's flashlight could only reach so far, but I knew it wasn't an animal. It was upright, still, watching. I stared at it, unmoving, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the longer I looked, the clearer it became. Someone, something was out there.
I don't know what came over me, but I slowly rose from the bench and started creeping toward it. I crouched slightly as I walked, like that would somehow make me more subtle, less visible. The crunch of my own footsteps felt deafening. As I got closer, maybe 20 feet away, I noticed something that sent a chill through my chest. A hand. It was wrapped tightly around the edge of the tree trunk. But it wasn't bare, it was gloved, and not just any glove. It was one of those old, white costume gloves. Faded, dirty, like something pulled from the back of a Halloween bin. That was the moment everything in my body screamed that I was in real danger. Not spooked, not startled, but life or death terrified. I hadn't even seen the person's face yet, and already I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. And that's when they stepped out. Into the narrow beam of my flashlight, from behind the tree, emerged someone dressed as a clown. I should probably mention, this all happened during that bizarre clown epidemic back in 2016. You remember it? People dressing up as clowns and lurking in random places at night, chasing others, scaring kids, even carrying weapons. It made national headlines for weeks. That wave of chaos was still rolling when I had my encounter. And as I stood there, frozen, staring into the beam of my flashlight, it became clear. This guy had gone all out. Even with the limited light, I could tell the costume was no cheap party store getup. He had the full clown makeup smeared across his face like something out of a nightmare. White base, exaggerated black features around the eyes and mouth, and a blood-red smile that stretched too far. His outfit sagged and swayed with every step, vibrant, dirty, and oversized. Even the clown shoes were there, worn and scuffed from walking these trails. But none of that compared to what he was holding. In one hand, he gripped a wooden bat, and jammed through it, dead center, was a massive metal spike, a foot long at least, rusted, brutal looking. It had been forced straight through the barrel of the bat, turning it into something far more sinister than a prop. He tilted his head downward, chin tucked to his chest, but his eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, never left mine. The way he angled his face made his entire posture feel more menacing, more animalistic, like he was preparing to pounce. Then he started walking. Each step punctuated by the soft crunch of dirt beneath those ridiculous shoes. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. My body knew what to do before my brain caught up. I turned and ran. I didn't even bother with the trail. I veered off into the woods, crashing through branches and brush, gasping for breath. My legs burned, my lungs screamed. I was already exhausted from my earlier run, but somehow I pushed through the pain, adrenaline blinding everything else. Eventually, I felt like I was going to puke. My body just couldn't take it anymore. I reached the thick tree and crouched behind it, switching off my flashlight. Everything went dark, true, suffocating black. I pressed my back against the bark, clamping a hand over my mouth to muffle my breathing. And then I heard him. The sound of footsteps thundering through the woods, fast, erratic, charging past me just 10 feet away. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just waited. When the noise finally faded into the distance, swallowed by the forest, I knew I had one chance. I bolted. I stumbled my way back toward where I thought the trail was, heart pounding so loud it felt like it echoed. When I finally found the dirt path again, I didn't stop. I ran the entire way back. No pacing, no slowing down, just pure terror fueling every step. And by the time I reached the edge of the preserve, where the woods gave way to streetlights and asphalt, I collapsed onto the sidewalk and vomited. My body had just given out from the stress, the fear, and the sprint that felt like it would never end. I didn't mention it earlier, but after that night, people started talking. That body they found the week before? Everyone started linking it to the clown sightings, the timing, the silence, the way it was discovered deep in the woods. It didn't feel like a coincidence. After that, I stayed away from the preserve for a long time, and I never went back there after dark again. I went on a solo camping trip not far from my house, just a few miles out, deep enough into the woods to feel cut off from the rest of the world, but close enough that it felt manageable.
It wasn't anything big or dramatic, I just wanted some quiet, a little time alone in nature. After setting up camp and eating a simple meal, I crawled into my tent and dozed off for about half an hour, just a quick nap to recharge before heading out for a short hike. The trail itself was unremarkable at first, peaceful even. A soft breeze moved through the trees and the forest around me was hushed, calm. Everything felt still. There were no other voices, no distant sounds of civilization, just the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional bird call echoing through the canopy. And then, I heard footsteps. At first, I didn't think much of it. Could have been an animal, maybe a deer, or something smaller scuttling through the underbrush. But as I kept walking, I noticed something odd. The steps, they didn't sound like an animal's. They were too steady, too rhythmic, almost deliberate, human-like, if that makes any sense. I stopped for a moment and glanced around, scanning the trees and shadows, waiting for something to move. But there was nothing, just silence again. The idea of another person being out here didn't quite sit right with me. I was far from any town, and this wasn't exactly a popular hiking spot, especially not this deep into the woods. Still, I didn't go looking for anyone. I brushed it off and kept walking, trying to stay calm and enjoy the trail. But the feeling never quite left me. By the time I made it back to my campsite, the sun had dipped a little lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. As I approached the tent, something immediately felt wrong. The zipper on the front flap, it was undone, and the flap itself was hanging open. A cold rush of adrenaline hit me all at once. My first thought was that someone had been inside, maybe still was. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, listening for any sound inside. Nothing. I forced myself to move, pulling the flap wider and checking inside. No one was there. I crouched down and stepped in. My gear was still there, my sleeping bag, my food pack, my flashlight. But my bag, it had been gone through. The zippers were open, some of the contents scattered slightly, like someone had rummaged through it quickly. I checked everything, one item at a time. Strangely, nothing had been taken. Not my phone charger, not the cash in the side pocket, not even the snacks. Whoever it was, they hadn't come to steal anything. They just looked. I stood there, tense, trying to make sense of it. For a few moments, I actually considered packing up and finding a new spot to set up camp. But then another thought hit me. Whoever came, they'd already been here. They'd already seen everything. They were gone now. So what would be the point of moving? I figured if they had a reason to come back, they would have stayed. So I zipped the tent closed again and sat down, trying to shake off the growing unease creeping into my gut. Later that night, once the sun had long disappeared and the forest had settled into its quiet nocturnal rhythm, I climbed back into my tent, zipped the flap tight, and curled up in my sleeping bag. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that made it easy to burrow in deep and drift off. At least, that's what I hoped would happen. Just a few minutes after settling in, before I even had time to relax, I heard something. A sound. A sound. At first, I couldn't place it. It wasn't loud, more like a soft disturbance outside the silence. A faint crackle maybe, or a rustle just beyond the tent walls. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Then it came again. This time it was clearer, a strange, low, breathing sound. But it wasn't natural. It didn't sound like a person or an animal. It was warped, grainy, static-laced, like the sound was being filtered through a broken speaker. Almost mechanical. My heart jumped. I sat up in the darkness, pushing the sleeping bag down to my waist, my ears straining. Silence. Total silence. I stayed there like that, frozen upright for what felt like forever, listening, waiting, hoping it was just in my head. Eventually, I forced myself to lie back down and try to breathe normally again. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe it was nothing. I closed my eyes, and not even 10 seconds later, it returned. That same staticky, breathing noise. Except now it was closer, sharper, pressing in through the thin fabric of the tent. Panic shot through me like a jolt. I sat up again, heart hammering in my chest. I reached for my bag, unzipped the main compartment, and started digging through it, maybe for a flashlight, maybe just to feel something familiar. And that's when I found it. Something I knew, without a shred of doubt, I hadn't packed. It was huge, bulky, I pulled it out and felt the cold metal and cracked plastic in my hands. It looked like an old, archaic walkie-talkie, bigger than my forearm, heavy and outdated, with a worn speaker grill and a long, rusted antenna. There were no lights, no markings, just that sound. The breathing, the static, was coming from it. My hands trembled as I held it, staring down at the thing in disbelief. The connection was immediate in my head. The footsteps from earlier, the open tent, whoever went through my bag, they had left this. But why? What did they want me to find? Just as that thought passed through my mind, the static abruptly stopped. And for a second, the silence was worse. Then came the breathing again. But this time, it was no longer buried in static. It was clear, wet, raspy, right in my ear. And then, in a voice so deep and distorted it barely sounded human, I heard it whisper, "I'm not your cat." It's wild, terrifying really, how everything in your world can shift in the span of just a few seconds. One moment you're sitting there trying to process what you just heard, "I'm not your cat," and the next, your entire body is overtaken by pure primal fear. My fingers moved on instinct. I started frantically pressing every button I could find on the oversized walkie-talkie, desperate to make it stop. I didn't care if I broke it, didn't care if I somehow activated something worse. I just wanted the sound, that voice, gone. After a few seconds of fumbling, it finally powered down. The static cut out, the silence returned. But not for long. I heard something heavy drop outside. It wasn't close at first, maybe 10 or 15 feet away, but the thud was unmistakable. Something solid hitting the forest floor. Not an animal, not wind. Something placed. A sick wave of dread washed over me. Now I had a choice, one of those split-second decisions you hope you'll never have to make. Do I stay? Do I stand my ground, protect my belongings, brace myself for whatever might be outside? Or do I run? Before I could make up my mind, another sound came, this time closer. Much closer. Something else hit the ground, right outside the tent. Right outside. That decided it. I didn't hesitate a second longer. I unzipped the tent in one frantic motion, shoved the flap open, and ran. I left everything behind. My tent, my sleeping bag, my gear, none of it mattered anymore. Not when I was convinced, knew, deep in my bones, that my life might be on the line. The cold air burned my lungs as I sprinted through the trees, my boots slamming against the dirt with every step. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see who or what was behind me. I aimed straight for my pickup, the only thing tethering me to safety, to the real world outside this nightmare. The whole time, my mind was racing as fast as my legs. What if it was a trap? What if the voice, the breathing, the walkie-talkie, all of it was meant to scare me off, meant to get me to abandon everything so someone could swoop in and take it? Or worse, what if it wasn't about my stuff at all? What if they weren't after what I brought? But who? What if the goal wasn't theft, but me?